The room hasn't changed in 34 years, not in the ways that matter. The blinds still hang uneven, cutting pale lines through the stillness. Dust hovers above the cracked linoleum like a memory that refuses to settle. The faint scent of forgotten paper lingers in the air, mixing with the metallic dryness of time itself. And in the center of it all lies the mark, the place where a life once paused and never resumed. It is here, in this dim, airless corner of a small Texas residence, that the investigator stops again, letting the silence speak first. He stands without moving, as though any shift in posture might disturb the calm surface of the past. The case file under his arm feels heavier than he remembers, weight increased not by pages but by time. He lowers it slowly onto the dusted table, watching small particles rise and drift. A pause, a breath, the returning echo of a story he once closed and shelved. Her name was Liora Dane, age 27, a local librarian known for her quiet presence and remarkable recall. She lived alone in this small rental house off a narrow county road. On a warm evening in August 1991, she was found lying near the back wall, posture still, expression unbroken. There had been no visible struggle, no overturned furniture, no loud event overheard by neighbors. She looked as though she had simply stepped out of her life in silence. The original investigators, younger and pressed by the limits of early 90s procedure, searched, questioned, and drew thin conclusions. The absence of any clear motive or pattern rendered the case motionless within weeks. And so it sat on a shelf, then in a storage box, then in the dim warehouse that held unsolved stories waiting for new eyes. The investigator, now older, more deliberate, moves through the shadowed room, not touching anything at first. He lets his memory reconstruct the layout as he once saw it. The lamp that never flickered on, the books aligned in careful order, the small framed photograph of Liora with her younger brother standing near a lake. Her presence lingers not as warmth, but as an outline drawn from careful habits. He crouches, fingertips hovering over the faint trace on the wall. Back then, it seemed unremarkable, a minor imperfection in the paint. Now, he wonders how many small details were dismissed because no one knew how to interpret them. Above him, the light settles again, dimming slightly as if the past is closing in around the quiet. His own memory slips back to the days after the scene was first documented. He remembers the uncertainty among the team, the cautious tones, the hesitant assessments. Liora's coworkers described her as observant, meticulous, someone who listened more than she spoke. No one held grievances with her. No one reported arguments or troubling visits. She walked home from the library before dusk each night. Her habits were predictable, steady. He stands again, pulling in the scent of old wood and absorbing the stillness. The first investigators believed the absence of chaos meant intrusion was unlikely. Yet the absence of chaos could have meant the opposite, someone familiar, someone trusted. He thinks of Liora's final checked-out records from the library log, histories of regional settlement, early survey maps, a few old letters donated by a local family that had once owned the land. At the time, the investigator had seen those details as footnotes, not pathways. He circles the room one more time, careful with every step. Each corner carries a pause, a faint echo of her routine. Something nags quietly at the back of his thoughts, a sensation he cannot yet articulate. Then he returns to the table, opening the old case file with the slow precision of someone uncovering something fragile. The pages release a faint dryness, the scent of decades pressed between sheets. Photographs sit inside, small, grainy, captured by cameras that lacked clarity but carried weight. He studies the earliest scene photos again. The positioning, the shape of light entering the window, the alignment of her belongings. Everything appears too orderly, yet subtly mismatched, as if someone tried to respect her space but could not fully imitate her quiet precision. He exhales softly, letting the first realization settle. This room may hold answers that were overlooked not because they were hidden, but because they required patience. The dimness presses around him, and he allows it to. Cold, slow, methodical, an unsolved story breathing in quiet repetitions. He turns the page. The past waits. 2. Case reopens due to discovery of new crucial evidence. 1,000 words, continuing tone. The case returned to the investigator's desk not through chance, but through an archival update at the county facility. A routine organization effort uncovered a small envelope taped to the underside of a misfiled box, an envelope he had never seen during the original investigation. It held a single item, a photograph. He remembers the moment clearly. The envelope felt light, but the air around it seemed weighted. Inside lay a print no larger than a postcard, edges slightly curled. The image captured Liora standing near the entrance of the library, her expression serene, posture relaxed. But behind her, half hidden by a stack of donated books, stood a figure, partially turned, unclear, a suggestion rather than a presence. The photo wasn't dated. It wasn't catalogued. It wasn't referenced in any prior reports. He brought it to his desk, placing it under the small lamp kept for delicate examinations. The graininess prevented clear conclusions, yet something in the posture of the figure hinted at familiarity. A tilt of the shoulder, a subtle angle of the head. The discovery alone justified reopening the case. A photo taken shortly before Liora's final day could not remain unexamined. And so the paperwork began. Official notices filed, archival access renewed, the old case number reactivated. Returning to the old scene now felt not like a task but a responsibility. The investigator knew that time often distorted clarity, but occasionally it sharpened it. He studies the newly found photo again, holding it gently by its edges as he stands within Liora's small living room. He turns slightly, aligning the photo's background with the room's structure in his memory. The angle from which it was taken suggests someone familiar with her routines, someone close enough to capture her without height or distance skewing the frame. He walks to her bookshelf, still marked by the faint impressions of volumes that once stood in orderly rows. Among the empty spaces, he recalls a specific detail. One book had been slightly misaligned during the original documentation. He hadn't thought much of it, assuming ordinary use. Now, that minor shift feels intentional, or at least meaningful. He crouches, examining the shelf with patient focus. Layers of dust speak to decades of stillness, but as he runs a gloved finger lightly near the back corner of the middle shelf, he notices something, a subtle indentation in the wood grain. Not quite damage, more like a repeated pressure from a small object. Something had been pressed there long before the room was sealed. He checks the case file again. No record of hidden items. No mention of discovered objects, no sign the shelf had been examined beyond surface-level review. Above him, the window allows a thin ribbon of pale daylight to enter. It lands near his hand, illuminating the small indentation with soft clarity. He photographs it, documenting its shape and angle. Then he sits back on his heels, letting the stillness settle again. The new evidence, the photograph, had not only forced the case open but also altered the way he now interprets every prior detail. He senses there is more here. He stands slowly, breath steady, and walks toward the narrow hallway that leads to Liora's bedroom. The door remains slightly ajar, as it was when first discovered. He pushes it open with a gentle motion, feeling the hinges protest faintly. The bedroom carries less physical weight than the living room, but more emotional gravity. Her bed was neatly made at the time, corners tucked with quiet precision. Nothing suggested disturbance, yet even order can conceal. He approaches the nightstand, its drawer still slightly open, the way it was left by the first investigative team. Inside were simple belongings, a watch with a worn band, a folded slip of paper containing a brief note written in her careful handwriting, and a library catalog card that did not correspond to any known checkout record. He lifts the catalog card again, examining the faded print. The numbers align with an older classification system discontinued years before Liora's employment at the library. She would not have used this card in her regular duties. He places the card gently beside the new photograph. Two objects that did not fit. Two objects that now direct every step of his renewed inquiry. He inhales the scent of aged paper once more, letting the sensation ground him in methodical observation. He knows that each detail, no matter how small, must now be approached as if it holds weight. Because one of them does. 3 investigator examines past reports to identify overlooked details. 1,000 words. Back at the precinct, the investigator sits in a quiet office lit only by a single desk lamp. The rest of the building hums faintly with distant activity, but he keeps his door closed, preserving a space where time slows, where each piece of information can be studied without interruption. He spreads the old reports across the table in precise order. Every page is scanned with deliberate, almost reverent focus. He knows these documents by memory, yet he approaches them as though reading for the first time, eyes open to overlooked possibilities. The earliest report outlines the timeline. Liora's last verified sighting at the library, the estimated time she returned home, the neighbor who noticed her porch light flicker but thought nothing of it, the absence of unusual sounds or motion on the street, the old procedural checks, door locks, window latches, phone records. Nothing stands out, yet nothing fully settles. He turns to the statements from those who knew her. A coworker mentioned Liora had recently taken interest in historical documents donated by a long-established local family. Another recalled seeing her studying regional land maps. At the time, these seemed unrelated to her final evening, viewed merely as professional curiosity. The investigator circles these mentions now, drawing faint pencil marks beside each one. He flips to the photo logs. Image after image shows the room as it was found, calm, tidy, devoid of visible disruption. But he now searches for discrepancies in alignment, in spacing, in pattern. He pauses at the shelf photo, comparing it to the indentation discovered hours earlier. The indentation was never documented. The lack of mention feels significant. He leans back slowly, letting the chair creak beneath him. The air in the office carries a soft scent of dust and warm paper under the lamp's heat. He closes his eyes for a brief moment, picturing Liora's room as it would have been in 1991, quiet, organized, shaped by a mind that sought structure. He reopens the photo, eyes narrowing. Something in the angle of the blinds. The blinds in the present-day room hang uneven. In the original photos, they are straight. He checks the timestamp. The daylight direction suggests they should have cast a similar shadow pattern on the floor. But the shadows in the old photo slant slightly left, while now they fall slightly right. The blinds had been altered at some point before the official photos were taken. Someone had been in the room after Liora's final evening, but before law enforcement arrived. He writes this observation down with calm precision. No assumptions, only documented contrast. Turning next to interview notes, he revisits the early statements from neighbors. One neighbor, Mr. Redden, had mentioned seeing a shape moving near Leora's front windows earlier than her estimated time of arrival. The detail was vague, dismissed as an indistinct motion possibly caused by passing headlights. But Liora lived on a road rarely used after dusk. The investigator underlines the statement, adding a margin note. The overlooked details begin forming faint connections, not definitive but directional. He takes a slow breath, hearing only the soft hum of the lamp. The catalog card. The misaligned shelf. The newly discovered photo. The altered blinds. The early motion reported by the neighbor. Separate they are small. Together they suggest presence. A presence not accounted for. He closes the file gently, keeping the photo visible beside it. The past, once still, now begins to shift. Suspects were always present in the original investigation, but they hovered at the edges, quiet figures with partial stories and untested claims. Now, with the case reopened and new details reframing old assumptions, each name returns with sharper contours. The investigator sits again in his quiet office, a dim afternoon light drifting across the scattered files. He opens the first folder. Samuel Redden, the neighbor who lived 3 houses down in 1991. He was the one who reported a faint shape moving past Leora's window earlier than the accepted timeline. At the time, he seemed cooperative, offering simple answers, steady reminders of an otherwise uneventful evening. But his alibi rested on routine. He claimed he was fixing a loose fence panel when he saw the motion. No corroboration, only a statement. The investigator studies Redden's past interview. The man described Liora as polite, reserved, someone he greeted from a distance but seldom spoke to. Nothing hinted at conflict. Yet his account of the movement near the window had been vague, almost too vague, as though shaped more from suggestion than memory. Now the detail feels different, less vague, more potentially protective. He sets Redden's file aside carefully. The next suspect, Maurice Calder, a former colleague of Leora's at the library. Their relationship, according to staff statements, had been friendly but distant. Maurice often mentioned that Liora had a focus for archival work unusual for the small-town library, especially regarding a set of historical documents relating to land ownership disputes from early settlement years. Maurice admitted she thought Leora's interest bordered on obsession. During the original investigation, Maurice stated she had left work early the day Liora last left the library. She claimed she visited a relative in a nearby town, arriving around the time Liora would have reached home. The alibi was thin, verified only loosely through a phone call the relative remembered receiving, though not the exact time. The investigator remembers questioning Maurice decades ago. Her tone had been cautious, her descriptions clipped. She didn't express fear or suspicion, only uncertainty. Now, in the context of Leora's increasingly focused research into specific historical matters, the dynamic between them takes on a new hue. Perhaps not conflict, but tension through misalignment of interest. He sets Maurice's file beside Redden's. The third suspect, Dean Larratt, a local handyman who occasionally worked near the library. He had a reputation for drifting between small tasks, maintaining a low profile, seldom raising attention. In the early reports, he admitted seeing Liora on multiple occasions, sometimes when delivering repaired furniture, other times when passing by the library entrance. He insisted his interaction with her was limited, simple exchanges about small repairs and weather. Yet Larratt had no strong alibi for the night in question. He claimed he was home alone, working on a personal project. Nothing placed him elsewhere. His tone during interviews had been steady, detached, but not evasive. He appeared neutral, just a man with little insight and no visible motive. Still, his file was thick with notes about proximity. Opportunity was not a motive, but it was a factor. The investigator leans back slightly, letting his gaze drift across the 3 stacks of files. Each suspect presents possibility, but none offer clarity. He revisits the photograph, the one found taped beneath the archived box. Behind Liora, a figure stands partially hidden. The angle obscures facial features, but posture is unmistakable, slightly turned, shoulders drawn inward, an almost hesitant stance. He studies each suspect's photograph from the old reports, comparing their natural postures, searching for patterns of stance or movement. Redden stood with squared shoulders in his photo. Maurice leaned slightly forward. Larrett stood with a cautious tilt, similar but not definitive. He places the photo down gently. Suspects form not from certainty but from convergence. He knows the process demands caution, emotional distance, steady logic. Still, the renewed investigation frames each person differently now. Redden, with his vague motion report and solitary routine. Maurice, with her unease toward Liora's archival interests. Larrett, with his proximity and lack of verifiable movement. 3 names, 3 incomplete stories. The investigator folds his hands, letting the quiet deepen. He senses the truth lies within these past figures, not in dramatic revelations, but in subtle fractures. He returns to the files. The work continues. 5 clues emerge slowly, linking inconsistencies to emotional conflicts. 1,000 words. Clues seldom arrive fully formed. They drift in through overlooked cracks. The investigator, guided by this slow accumulation, turns his attention to the 2 items that reopened everything, the catalog card and the photograph. First, the catalog card. He places it under a lamp, examining the print again. The numbers trace back to a classification system used decades before any of the suspects worked at the library, or before Liora herself was old enough to work. Yet the card was found in her nightstand, folded carefully, preserved like something important. He retrieves her work schedule logs from the archives, cross-referencing the days she handled donations from local families. One date stands out. A collection from an old land-owning family was processed by Liora and assisted unexpectedly by Maurice. The records show Maurice had volunteered to help sort, though this wasn't part of her usual routine. The investigator underlines the date, remembering Maurice's mention of Liora's unusual interest in old land surveys. The catalog card might have belonged to that donated set, misplaced or deliberately removed. Its presence in Liora's room suggests significance. He places the card aside. Next, the photograph. He enlarges the image digitally, tracing the faint outline behind Liora. The figure's hand partially emerges from behind the books, just a shape, not detailed but expressive in its hesitation. He compares it again to old photos of the suspects. Redden's hands were broad and squared. Larrett's hands appeared narrow but marked by calluses. Maurice's hands in her staff photo were small, fingers slightly curved inward. The partial silhouette in the photograph shows a hand with a subtle inward bend. Not proof, but direction. He studies the witness statements once more. Maurice had expressed concern that Liora's research might stir things that didn't need stirring, though the phrasing had originally been dismissed as general worry about workload. Now, paired with the catalog card and the photograph, the sentence feels different, less casual, more emotional. He notes the pattern: interest, tension, hesitation, proximity. Still, he takes care not to jump ahead. He returns to Redden's earlier statement about motion near the window before Liora arrived home. The new detail about the blinds in the original photos, straight, controlled contrasts with the slightly altered blinds in the present-day scene. Someone must have adjusted them during that undocumented window of time. Redden lived close enough to observe movement, but his description remained vague, lacking detail. That vagueness could mask protection or uncertainty. Larrett's file reveals a small discrepancy. In his first interview, he claimed he hadn't entered the library in the week before Liora's final shift. But donation logs show he delivered a repaired table 2 days prior, placing him inside the building, close enough to observe interactions between Liora and her colleagues. He marks the contradiction quietly. 3 suspects, 3 subtle fractures in their narratives. He breathes in the faint paper scent, grounding himself in process. As he re-examines notes on Liora's personality, quiet, observant, meticulous, he returns to her map research. Old land disputes, donated documents, regional settlement notes. These weren't random interests. They formed a trail. Perhaps she discovered something small but meaningful, something that intersected with someone else's past. The investigator turns to local archives, pulling settlement maps from the period Liora investigated. Some tracts bear the same family name as the one that donated the documents she had last processed. The same family whose records included handwritten notes, catalog numbers from obsolete systems, and corrections marked in ink. If Liora had followed an inconsistency in those records, it could have placed her in conflict with someone connected to them. He reopens Mari's file. Her family name appears, distantly, in the margins of the donated letters. A small intersection, not definitive but present. He notes the possibility and continues. Something begins to form, not as clarity but as a faint outline. The catalog card. The photograph. The misaligned shelf. The altered blinds. The motion in the window. The map research. The donation logs. The loose statements. Each detail shifts against the others, slowly aligning through emotion more than intent. Conflicts built not from anger but from unease, fear of discovery, pressure of history, buried tensions resurfacing. He absorbs it quietly, letting the calm weight of logic guide him. Some truth lies here. He just hasn't reached its surface yet. 6. Unexpected twist reveals the least suspected person as killer. 1,000 words. The twist emerges not through surprise, but through slow, steady deduction. The investigator begins by pushing aside the 2 strongest early suspects, Redden and Larrett, not through elimination, but through absence. Their inconsistencies exist, but none intersect meaningfully with Liora's precise interests or the archival material she handled. Their proximity mattered, but their emotional distance felt genuine. Their statements, though imperfect, lacked the subtle weight of personal conflict. Then he returns to the photograph. The partially hidden figure behind Liora. The hand with its slight inward curve. The posture, hesitant, almost protective. The figure is female. Not definitive, but supported by proportions. He runs the comparison again with caution. Larrett eliminated. Redden unlikely. Mari's remaining. He re-examines Mari's interviews, focusing on her tone, her fragmented phrasing. She had said Liora's research might disrupt old things. The wording, once vague, now reveals emotional conflict. Mari's family had ties to the donated materials. Their land disputes from decades earlier contained errors, small misallocations that, if noticed, could cast new doubt on long-standing ownership claims. The catalog card in Liora's nightstand likely belonged to that collection. If Liora had noticed the inconsistency, she might have asked questions. Quiet ones, careful ones, the kind that would unsettle someone whose family history contained vulnerable threads. He examines the indentation in the bookshelf again. Something small rested there, perhaps the missing catalog card or a folded document. Something removed before the original investigators arrived. Someone familiar with Liora's careful organization would know exactly where to look. Someone who had assisted with sorting those documents. Someone who visited her home once, delivering additional materials she requested. Maurice had mentioned this in an early note, though it wasn't recorded as a formal statement. He writes it down. Only now does the investigator return to Redden's vague motion report. The motion might not have been Liora. It could have been someone leaving the house earlier than assumed, someone whose presence felt familiar enough to avoid raising alarm. The blinds, straight in the old photograph, altered in the present. Someone may have adjusted them to look out before leaving, checking the quiet road, ensuring the moment remained unnoticed. He checks Mari's movements on the day in question. She left work early, drove somewhere. A call to a relative confirmed only her voice, not her location. Her route home would have taken her past Liora's street. He places all the pieces together slowly, breathing steadily. The unpredictable now appears logical. The least suspected, quiet, diligent, seemingly cooperative, becomes the most entangled. Maurice called her. Not through malice but through fear. Not through impulse, but through emotional pressure tied to old history. Not planned but triggered by discovery, Liora's discovery. The photograph captures it in the faint posture of someone who lingered near Liora, uncertain, conflicted. The truth does not rise dramatically. It arrives quietly, with the weight of logic falling into place. The investigator closes the file. The twist is not shocking. It is inevitable. The conclusion arrives without ceremony. Paperwork, signatures, quiet confirmations. The investigator files the completed report into the updated case record, sliding it into the archives with the same deliberate precision he used while examining every detail. A soft click of the cabinet latch. A muted exhale. The resolution does not feel triumphant. It feels methodical, almost distant, an outcome reached not by sudden insight, but by slow alignment of small truths. Each clue a quiet fragment, each observation a step leading toward a simple but irrevocable conclusion. Maurice Calder stood at the center of the event that shaped the quiet evening in 1991. The investigator remains in his office long after the building has thinned to silence. A faint hum from the old air system mixes with the muted rustle of the papers he has not yet rearranged. The desk lamp casts a pool of pale light across the surface, illuminating the edges of the photograph, the one that, decades late, altered everything. He lifts it again, holding it at an angle. Liora stands in the foreground, unaware, calm, focused on something beyond the frame. Behind her, the obscured figure watches with a subtle inward pull, a posture shaped by hesitation. The photo captured more than an image. It captured conflict, quiet, unspoken, hidden in gesture. He sets the photograph down slowly. In the final interview, conducted weeks after the reopened investigation surfaced its conclusions, Mari spoke little. Her responses were fragmented, restrained. She didn't deny presence. She didn't assert innocence. She didn't attempt to redirect blame. Her words were small, almost brittle. I didn't expect her to see it, she noticed things. The investigator wrote the statement exactly as spoken. No interpretation, no addition. It was not a confession in legal terms, but it aligned with every objective detail uncovered. Her tone carried no anger, only the weight of an overdue truth. She had visited Liora's house that evening. She admitted as much. She brought additional documents, pieces Liora had requested, a gesture that had seemed cooperative at the time but in hindsight carried tension beneath its surface. Liora found the catalog card among the stack. She recognized its inconsistency. She questioned it gently. And something in Mari's restraint fractured. Not violence in a dramatic sense, not chaos, merely an immediate and pressured action taken in a moment where emotional conflict outweighed clarity, a push, a stumble, an unintended stillness. Then silence. The investigator had read the final notes again and again, each time accepting how small actions can lead to large, irrevocable shifts. The absence of dramatic motive didn't reduce the weight of the outcome. If anything, it deepened it. The room around him grows quieter as evening settles outside the windows. He closes the photograph within the file, letting the cover fall with careful softness. His mind returns to the dim, forgotten crime scene he revisited, the uneven blinds, the misaligned shelf. The dust settled thick across surfaces that once held movement. Each detail existed for decades without attention, waiting for a moment where they could be reinterpreted. He remembers standing in Liora's living room, breathing in the faint scent of old wood. He remembers the subtle shift of light across the wall where the faint mark remained. Even then, before the new evidence emerged, he sensed something dormant beneath the stillness. Now, with the case resolved, that stillness takes on a different contour, not emptiness but completion. He stands from his desk, stretching slowly, allowing the quiet to settle around him. For a moment, he rests a hand on the back of the chair, grounding himself in the present. Then he gathers the files into a neat stack. He doesn't carry pride. He doesn't feel relief. He feels something more subdued, an understanding that truth is rarely dramatic, rarely complete, rarely comforting. He walks to the small window at the edge of the office, looking out at the fading light. The sky holds a soft hue, neither warm nor cold. It mirrors the neutrality of the case's conclusion, clear but not bright. In the hallway beyond the office door, faint footsteps echo, a shift in air pressure, the building settling into evening. The investigator returns to the desk and opens a fresh report form, documenting the final steps of closure. He writes with slow, even strokes, letting the words shape the narrative one last time. Case resolved through accumulation of evidence. Outcome derived from logical consistency. Emotional motivation minimal but present. Final assessment. Event resulted from pressure, conflict, and immediate reaction rather than extended intent. He reads the lines again, ensuring their clarity. No embellishment. No unnecessary detail. Only what can be proven. He signs the bottom of the page, the pen leaving a controlled, precise mark. When the signature dries, he places the final report in the completed case drawer. A soft thud. A gentle close. A chapter sealed. But the emotional residue remains. He sits down again, hands loosely clasped, letting the silence return. He thinks of Liora, of her quiet routines, her meticulous nature, her curiosity. He imagines her last evening not as a dramatic event, but as a moment shaped by her character. Careful observation, gentle questions, the kind that could unsettle someone unprepared to answer truthfully. He remembers the indentation in her shelf, the catalog card preserved in the nightstand, the window blinds shifted by an unseen hand. Small gestures, each one carrying its own rhythm of meaning. He also thinks of Mari's, not with judgment, but with understanding of the fragility that underpins human decisions. Her actions weren't calculated but reactive, not driven by domination, but by fear. Fear of what Liora might uncover, fear of what old documents might reveal, fear of disruption to something long buried and quietly guarded. He lets the thought fade. The office hums softly again. He picks up the final photograph of Liora from the case file, holding it for a moment longer before placing it back into the envelope. He studies her expression, calm, steady, reflective. It's not a clue now. It's simply a reminder of the life behind the investigation. He exhales. The truth, he knows, didn't surface easily. It drifted into clarity slowly, shaped by patience more than pursuit. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was a quiet convergence of details that together revealed a path hidden for decades. He turns off the desk lamp. The office darkens subtly, leaving only the faint light from the corridor through the half-open door. He gathers his coat and steps into the hallway, letting the gentle echo of his footsteps carry him toward the exit. Before leaving, he looks back at the office one last time. The darkness has settled evenly across the room, erasing edges, softening shapes, making everything look simpler than it truly is. He closes the door. Outside, the air feels steady, faintly cool. The town around him continues with quiet rhythm, cars passing distantly, a porch light flickering, the slow settling of evening. He walks toward his car, each step measured. A case solved, yet something unresolved lingers, not in the evidence but in the emotion beneath the facts. The truth exists, clear and documented, but its shape carries shadows. The investigator knows that some truths don't settle cleanly. They don't bring catharsis. They don't erase what was lost. Sometimes they simply reveal what was always there, quiet, subtle, almost invisible until someone decides to look closer. He reaches the car, opens the door, and pauses once more, letting the weight of the investigation release from his shoulders in a slow, controlled breath. Justice, he thinks, is a mechanism, steady, procedural, neutral. But understanding is something else entirely. He sits down, starts the engine, and drives into the dim Texas evening, feeling the stillness settle around him like a final reflection. Truth isn't always visible on the surface. Sometimes it waits quietly, patiently, beneath the smallest details. And when it emerges, it leaves behind not certainty, but a quiet echo of what it means to be human.